The metal components collided with a cold, dry scrape that echoed through the silence of the ancestral room. It was not the rhythmic, reassuring tick of passing time. It was a heavy, sudden grinding halt. The grand timepiece, a magnificent 18th century heirloom belonging to a legendary real estate tycoon's family, had gone completely motionless. The hour hand frozen on the number 12 felt like a chilling omen for the collapse of a multi-billion-dollar empire. The room was engulfed in a suffocating atmosphere of pure tension. 4 top restoration experts, flown in from Switzerland on a private jet overnight, stood staring at one another, sweat pouring down their foreheads. They had deployed the most advanced laser scanners available. They had injected the most expensive synthetic oil in the world into the rotating pivots. Yet the ancient, jewel-encrusted brass machinery remained mercilessly silent. The young CEO of the conglomerate, who had just inherited the seat of power from his deceased father, stood behind them with his arms crossed, his face deathly pale. His gaze was locked onto the 2-meter-tall grandfather clock, the exact place holding the only secret to unlocking the vault, containing the highly confidential last will and testament. Exactly 48 hours remained until the board of directors meeting that would decide the fate of the entire empire. Without the original will to prove legal inheritance, all shares and assets would be frozen by rival investment funds. A Swiss expert, his hands trembling as he removed his magnifying loupe, spoke in a stuttering voice. "Mr. Chairman, this mechanical structure is far too obsolete. Our computer simulation algorithms cannot identify why the escapement wheel is completely jammed. Our injection of the new oil seems to have increased the viscosity beyond expectation, leaving the mechanism acting like a dead block of steel." The young chairman slammed his hand onto the table, his roar shaking the very paintings on the walls. "I did not pay you $500,000 to listen to an helpless explanation. With all this money and the most modern technology, you cannot even fix a 200-year-old toy?" Silence fell over the space once more, broken only by the furious, heavy breathing of the powerful man. Right then, his close assistant stepped forward timidly, holding out a worn piece of paper. "Mr. Chairman, perhaps we must look for this man. He is the only one left in this city who still possesses a traditional set of hand-grinding tools." The young chairman glanced at the address, written on the paper, his brows furrowing in deep contempt. "A broken-down clock repair shop in the eastern slums. Our conglomerate's time cannot be wasted on an obsolete backyard mechanic." But the telephone ringing from the legal department sounded like a rescue siren, reminding him that the death of his financial empire was counting down by the hour. In a hidden corner of the city, where neon lights flickered against moss-covered walls, a somber ticking sound was echoing regularly. Inside the tiny workshop of less than 15 square meters, an old man with hair as white as snow sat quietly beneath a dim yellow bulb. His eyes were blurry behind a thick magnifying lens, but his hands remained extraordinarily calm. Beside him, a teenage boy around 15 years old sat motionless on a wooden stool, his eyes staring blankly into empty space. The boy did not speak, nor did they smile, but his ears would occasionally twitch slightly to the beat of each wall clock. The old man carefully cleaned a gear no larger than a grain of bean, softly whispering to his son. "Bao, can you hear it? This pendulum clock is feeling tired. Its heartbeat is slowing down by 0.2 of a second." The autistic boy did not answer with words, but he nodded slightly, his finger tapping the tabletop in exact alignment with the machine's frequency. It was a private language shared between father and son, a universe translated entirely through microscopic mechanical sounds. Their peaceful yet arduous life was being threatened by a 3-month overdue rent notice, plastered right on the glass door. If they could not secure enough cash this week, the shop, which served as the only sanctuary for his special son, would be foreclosed. The roaring engine of a luxury vehicle abruptly tore through the quietness of the poor neighborhood. The glass door of the repair shop was pushed open violently, making the brass wind chimes clash with a loud clang. The young chairman walked inside, his designer suit and expensive cologne, completely detached from the smell of machine oil and dust in the room. He looked around the place with a look of pure disgust, then threw a thick folder containing photos of the 18th century machine straight onto the old man's workbench. You are the master mechanic here, right? I am giving you a life-changing opportunity. Follow me to repair an ancient mechanism. The fee is $30,000. The old man did not even look up, his hands continuing to apply oil to a pivot with meticulous care. Young man, in this place, I only repair machines that find their own way here, and I do not tolerate haste. The old man's calmness felt like a bucket of ice water thrown directly at the tycoon's pride. He scoffed, pulling a thick stack of cash from his pocket and slamming it down right on top of the overdue rent bills. Stop pretending to be noble. Old man, look at this pile of debt. I know you need this money more than your hollow pride. Seeing the stranger slammed the table, the autistic son startled, grabbing his head and emitting panicked, low whimpers. The old man immediately dropped his tools, wrapping his arms tightly around his son, gently comforting the boy to soothe his terror. Only then did the old man's eyes look up to stare directly at the young chairman, no longer showing the blurriness of old age, but a chilling steadiness. Take your money back. My son cannot stand the noise, and this shop does not welcome people who do not know how to respect time. The wooden door of the clock repair shop closed gently behind the young, arrogant tycoon, leaving a faint streak of gray exhaust, smoke from his luxury vehicle, drifting across the window pane. The atmosphere within the tiny room was instantly engulfed in a thick silence, broken only by Bao's heavy breathing, which was slowly calming down under his father's soothing hand. The old man stared intently at the overdue rent notice, which was now partially pinned beneath a corner of the thick stack of cash the arrogant man had just left behind. $30,000, a figure substantial enough to clear every financial worry overnight, and more than enough to secure a peaceful sanctuary for his vulnerable son for several years to come. Yet he understood all too deeply that these ancient timepieces of the 18th century never yielded to those who viewed time as nothing more than flashing numbers on a stock ticker. He looked down at Bao, who had stopped panicking by now, his eyes once again locked onto the brass gear that was spinning steadily on the workbench. Bao gently raised a slender finger, lightly brushing against the outer rim of the gear, his mouth whispering numbers that meant absolutely nothing to an outsider, but translated to strict laws of physics for his father. 12, 24, 48, 36. The old man smiled, a somber smile, carrying both the immense pride and the boundless heartbreak of a single father raising a special child. People called his son disabled, an eccentric outcast rejected by society, but to him, the boy possessed a divine gift, an absolute sense of hearing that could capture the whisper of a single dust mote trapped within the crevices of time. The glass door rattled once more, and this time, it was the assistant who had returned alone, his face filled with an anxious, pleading expression. Sir, I truly apologize for the chairman's extreme rudeness. He is bearing an impossible weight from the board of directors as the 48-hour deadline bleeds away. If the pendulum clock of the late chairman does not function before the day after tomorrow, the entire empire of the family will fall to rivals, and thousands of workers will lose their livelihoods. The assistant bowed his head, placing a worn leather notebook on the table, explaining that this was the personal, restoration journal of the young chairman's deceased father, who had once been an old friend of the old man. Seeing the small anchor symbol engraved deeply into the corner of the leather binding, the old man's blurry eyes suddenly constricted. Memories from 30 years ago rushed back like a violent storm, back to a time when two young mechanics sat together by a forge, dreaming of creating perpetual machines for the world. The old man let out a long, heavy sigh, knowing that this was no longer a standard business proposition, but a profound debt of gratitude from the past calling out his name. Very well, return and tell your chairman that I will come, but I have two absolute conditions. First, my son must always accompany me, and second, your entire team of modern experts must vacate the room completely while we work. 2 hours later, a sleek black luxury vehicle brought the father and son to a halt before the massive iron gates of the grand mansion, sitting completely isolated on a hill. The space here was magnificent and freezing cold, a stark contrast to the warm, dusty comfort of their tiny workshop. Bao tightly clutched the hem of his father's frayed coat, his eyes darting frantically across the surroundings, deeply unsettled by the curious and judgmental stares of the security guards and servants. The young chairman was standing in the grand foyer, and seeing the old man arrive with his dazed son, his brows furrowed deeply in sharp disappointment. You brought a mentally deficient child to a secure location like this, old man? I agreed to let you come here because of my assistant's advice, but do not waste my remaining time with these ridiculous antics. The old man did not offer a word in response. He simply adjusted the worn backpack containing his hand-grinding tools, holding his son's hand as he walked straight toward the room, housing the treasured timepiece. Inside, the 4 Swiss experts were still hovering around the clock, their electronic measurement devices flashing red and green lights continuously. Seeing an old man with failing eyesight walking alongside an autistic child, they burst into a collective, mocking laughter. One speaking with a heavy European accent, full of superiority. Chairman, do you truly believe this backyard mechanic can achieve what our advanced laser scanning technology failed to solve? Look at those rusted tools in his pouch. They belong in a scrap museum, not near a historical masterpiece. The young chairman stood with his arms crossed against the door frame, his cold gaze waiting to see what tricks the old man would pull in front of the elite engineers. The old man maintained an unnerving, terrifying calmness, placing his rough wooden box down onto the polished marble floor, the sharp wooden thud causing the experts to fall completely silent. Bao suddenly stepped closer to the grand-grandfather clock, paying no attention to the emeralds encrusted on the wooden casing, but instead pressing his ear tightly against the steel base of the machine. The boy stood completely motionless, like a statue, for 2 whole minutes, his ears twitching slightly, before suddenly turning to look at his father, raising 3 fingers with absolute certainty. The 4 Swiss experts locked their eyes onto the autistic boy, their expressions shifting from mockery to pure annoyance. The lead engineer stepped forward, waving his hand dismissively, as if shooing away an insect. This is completely absurd. Chairman, the boy is just counting his fingers. Random numbers mean absolutely nothing to an ancient mechanical escapement. We are dealing with microtolerances, engineered in Geneva, not a child's playground game. The old man paid no attention to the loud protests, filling the grand room. He placed his hand gently on Bao's shoulder, his voice dropping to a calm, grounding whisper. 3. You say, tell me more, my son. Bao did not look at it, his eyes remaining frozen on the lower axle of the grand clock. His slender finger tapped against his own palm 3 times in a very specific, uneven rhythm. Tap, tap, pause, tap. The old man's eyes widened slightly behind his thick magnifying lens as he instantly understood the mechanical translation. The escapement wheel was not jammed because of a broken tooth, or a snapped spring. It was suffocating under the weight of 3 microscopic layers of mismatched fluid. The old man turned his head to look at the massive table covered in modern diagnostic laptops. He walked over, his worn leather boots making a soft, scraping sound against the polished marble floor. Without asking for permission, he picked up a small glass vial containing the expensive synthetic oil the experts had injected. He unscrewed the cap, brought it to his nose, and took a brief, careful sniff. A cold, knowing smile appeared on the old man's wrinkled face. "Young man," he said, addressing the young chairman, who was watching silently from the doorway. His father built this machine in 1995, using whale oil and locally sourced, unrefined mineral grease. The clearances between these brass teeth were specifically calculated to account for the heavy humidity of this coastal hill. These gentlemen from Switzerland brought synthetic oil designed for aerospace instruments in dry climates. When they pumped it into the core, the modern chemicals reacted with the residual ancient grease, creating a sticky, invisible glue. The lead expert's face flushed, turning a deep, angry crimson. How dare an uneducated street mechanic question our chemical formulas? We possess degrees from the highest institutes. Our scanners do not lie. The old man did not argue. He simply unfastened his worn, tattered backpack and took out a length of old, coarse copper wire and a small bottle containing a clear, pungent spirit. The tension in the room reached a boiling point as the old man approached the multi-million-dollar heirloom with these primitive tools. The young chairman took a step forward, his voice dripping with authority and deep suspicion. "Old man, if you damage a single component of this clock, your tiny shop will not be the only thing you lose. My lawyers will ensure you spend the rest of your days facing the consequences." The old man stopped, holding the copper wire just inches away from the frozen pendulum. He did not look intimidated. Instead, he looked at the young billionaire with a profound sense of pity. "You measure your life by the size of your bank account, young man, but your father measured his life by the truth of his work. If you want to save his legacy, stand back and let the real work begin." The young chairman froze, caught off guard by the sheer weight of the old man's words. Bao suddenly sat down on the floor right beside the clock's base, closing his eyes completely. The boy tilted his head, filtering out the sound of the air conditioning and the distant traffic, focusing entirely on the internal dead silence of the machine. The old man dipped the tip of the copper wire into the clear alcohol. His hand, which usually had a slight, age-related tremor, suddenly became as steady as a mountain. He slid the wire deep into the darkest crevice of the escapement assembly, right where the main pallet met the escape wheel. With a gentle microscopic scraping motion, it began to extract a thick, dark, yellowish residue. Every eye in the room was locked onto his fingers, the silence so deep you could hear the distant wind howling outside the mansion. As the old man pulled the wire out for the third time, a tiny metallic click echoed from inside the housing. Bao's eyes snapped open instantly, a bright spark of recognition flashing across his face. "Two," the boy whispered loudly, holding up 2 fingers this time. The Swiss experts looked at one another, their faces tight with a mix of disbelief and escalating irritation. The lead engineer stepped closer to the young chairman, lowering his voice but keeping it sharp enough for everyone to hear. "Mr. Chairman, this is completely out of hand. The boy is just pointing his fingers in a random gesture. We are using high-frequency resonance sensors, calibrating down to the micron, while this child is treating a 200-year-old national treasure like an elementary school math problem." The old man did not even lift his head to acknowledge the remarks slicing through the air. He kept his gaze locked on the alignment of the steel plates, his fingers remaining lightly perched on his son's shaking shoulder. Listen to the friction. Bao, tell your father where the pulse changes its rhythm. Bao did not look back at him, his face leaning closer to the internal weight system until his forehead almost touched the housing. His thin fingers began to stroke the air, mimicking a heartbeat that had gone completely off center. 2 beats fast, 1 heavy stutter, then a long dry silence. The old man nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he mentally cross-referenced the boy's reaction with the architecture of the mechanism. The modern synthetic fluid had not just caused a clog, it had altered the natural weight balance calculated by the original maker. He turned away from the clock, stepping toward the polished mahogany desk where the experts had set up their diagnostic array. His worn leather boots made a distinct, heavy scraping sound against the pristine marble, drawing a hard glare from the security detail. Without a word of explanation, he picked up a small metal stylus and an ancient magnifying loupe that belonged to the late owner. He brought the lens to his eye, looking down at the residue left on the edge of the master gear. A soft, almost imperceptible sigh escaped his lips as he saw the microscopic metal shavings trapped in the clear gel. "Young man," the old man said, looking directly at the young billionaire who was tracking his every move with a dark expression. "Your father did not build this escapement to be mathematically perfect. He built it to survive the changing atmospheric pressure of this mountain. The gears are cut with an intentional, microscopic play to allow the copper to breathe when the sea fog rolls in through these windows. These men used a non-reactive polymer oil meant for sealed laboratory instruments in dry climates. When that fluid met the trace mineral residue from a century ago, it caused the metal teeth to bind together like cold tar. The lead Swiss engineer stepped in between them, his face flushing a volatile crimson as his authority was stripped away. This is pure speculation from an uneducated laborer who does not understand molecular viscosity. Our instruments are certified by the Federation. We do not make mistakes based on local weather conditions." The old man simply reached into his canvas pouch, ignoring the shouting entirely, and brought out a small strip of untreated whalebone and a tin of natural lard. The atmosphere in the room turned freezing cold as he stepped back toward the multi-million-dollar heirloom with these crude materials. The young chairman moved to block his path, his voice carrying the full weight of his corporate power and legal leverage. "If your hands shake and scratch the engraving on that backplate, old man, you will not just lose your shop by tomorrow morning. I will personally ensure that every asset you own is liquidated, and your son will be placed in a state facility before nightfall." The old man stopped, the piece of whalebone held less than an inch away from the delicate pendulum string. He did not step back, nor did his expression flicker with fear. Instead, he looked at the young executive with an immense, heavy sorrow. "You have inherited your father's seat, young man, but you did not inherit his eyes." He knew that the most valuable things in this life cannot be measured by a machine. They must be felt through the hands that made them. "Ruega, if you want to save what he left behind, sit down and let the time speak for itself." The young chairman felt a cold shock hit his chest, the words cutting straight through his defensive, arrogant armor. Bao suddenly dropped to his knees on the floor, pulling his knees tightly to his chest as he closed his eyes against the light. The boy's ears twitched with a strange velocity, locking onto the internal tension of the mainspring assembly. The old man dipped the edge of the whalebone into the natural grease, his fingers becoming completely rock-steady as they entered the housing. He began to slide the thin material between the interlocking teeth, clearing away the chemical glue with a slow, hypnotic stroke. Every person in the room stopped breathing, the silence turning so absolute that the wind outside seemed to vanish. As the old man retracted the tool for the final time, a single, deep resonance vibrated from the base of the clock. Bao's eyes snapped open, a sharp grin breaking through his vacant expression as he reached out his hand. "One," the boy whispered clearly, pointing directly at the center axle. The four Swiss experts stood completely frozen, their eyes tracking the slow, rhythmic sweep of the pendulum as it executed its first successful arc. The heavy brass weight cut through the air with a deep, low hum that seemed to push the cold atmosphere right out of the room. Bao remained perfectly still on the marble floor, his eyes closed as he listened to the internal alignment clicking into place, step by step. "One," the boy whispered once more, his single extended finger tracing the exact cadence of the center axle as it locked into the tooth of the escape wheel. The young chairman took 2 slow steps forward, his expensive leather shoes clicking softly against the floor, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and reluctant awe. He looked from the swinging pendulum to the ancient piece of copper wire in the old man's hand, which was now stained with a dark, oily residue. The lead engineer from Switzerland rushed forward, his fingers tapping furiously on his diagnostic tablet as he tried to cross-reference the mechanical feedback. "This is impossible," he stammered, his voice losing all of its previous European arrogance as the data on his screen began to stabilize. The internal friction coefficient just dropped by 85%. The resistance in the primary gear train is completely gone. The old man did not look at the tablet, nor did he look at the elite engineers who were now backing away from the Komai in profound silence. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out a clean linen cloth, and wiped the ancient copper wire before placing it back into his wooden box. "Young man," the old man said, his voice echoing calmly through the grand space, "your father built this clock to survive human error, but he did not build it to survive modern pride. The chemical compound your experts used was designed to eliminate friction entirely, but they forgot that an antique machine requires a body of resistance to keep its balance. Without that balance, the mainspring delivers too much raw kinetic power to the escapement, causing the teeth to bind under their own pressure." The young billionaire stood before the ticking monument, his face pale as he realized how close he had come to destroying the only key to his family's future. He looked down at Bao, who was now slowly opening his eyes, a serene smile resting on his face as the chaotic world around him found its proper rhythm again. The assistant stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the moving pendulum before he let out a massive sigh of relief, his hands trembling as he checked his watch. "We have exactly 44 hours before the board meeting. Mr. Chairman, the legal team is waiting for the final validation sequence." The young chairman did not answer immediately, his gaze locked onto the lower base of the clock, where a small, concealed brass panel was beginning to shift. As the clock struck the first quarter hour, a deep melodic chime rang out through the mansion, vibrating through the structural timber of the walls. The sound triggered a mechanical release deep within the secondary weight track, a mechanism that had been dormant for over 50 years. With a soft metallic click, the hidden panel at the very bottom of the clock casing slid open by exactly 3 inches, revealing a dark hollow space inside. The young chairman dropped to one knee, his expensive suit forgotten as he reached into the opening, his fingers brushing against a thick cylinder of aged parchment. He pulled it out carefully, his heart pounding against his ribs as he recognized his father's distinctive wax seal stamped on the heavy red ribbon. This was it, the original last will and testament that would secure the livelihoods of thousands of workers and cement his rightful inheritance. But as he pulled the cylinder fully out of the dark recess, his fingers caught on a second item that had been placed right beside the document. It was a small, tarnished silver pocket watch, its outer casing engraved with the image of a simple ship's anchor, identical to the symbol on the old man's journal. The young billionaire froze, his breath catching in his throat as he turned the silver watch over in his palm, reading the inscription engraved on the back. To my brother in craftsmanship, who gave up his sight so that our work could live on, may time always find its way back to your doorstep. The young chairman looked up at the old man, his voice suddenly breaking as the full weight of the past crashed through his defensive armor. "And you," he whispered, looking from the inscription to the old man's faded eyes, "you are the one who designed the internal governance protocol for this entire system." The old man stood tall, his hands resting securely on his son's shoulders, his expression remaining as calm as the ticking machine behind him. "Your father was a visionary man, young man, but his hands were never steady enough to cut the final teeth of the escape wheel. I gave him my eyes 30 years ago in that cold workshop so that this clock could stand in this room and protect his family when the time came. I did not come here today for your $30,000, and I did not come here to save your corporate shares from your rivals. I came here because a true craftsman never leaves a brother's masterpiece in the dark when the gears stop turning." The silver watch felt heavy and cold in the young billionaire's hand, its polished metal reflecting the dim, ancient light inside the grand clock housing. He could not tear his eyes away from the engraved anchor on the back plate, a symbol that completely bridged the gap between his father's industrial empire and this dusty, broken-down watchmaker. The four Swiss experts stood in a stiff, silent row, their electronic tablets flickering with flat lines as the mechanical pulse of the heirloom grew stronger with every passing second. The lead engineer tried to speak, his voice cracking with a sudden, defensive panic. "Mr. Chairman, this cannot be legally binding. An inscription on an antique pocket watch does not alter the corporate charter or the missing documentation. We must focus on the digital encryption of the primary vault, not these emotional relics from a bygone era." The young chairman did not look at the engineer, his voice dropping to a low, quiet whisper that carried more authority than any shout. "Leave the room." The engineer blinked, stepping forward with his hands raised. "But sir, the diagnostic validation requires our team to," I said. "Leave the room, all of you." The young billionaire stood up slowly, turning his back to the experts and facing the old man, who was still holding Bao's shoulders. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only with the sharp, steady tick-tock of the resurrected 18th century masterpiece. The experts scrambled to pack their digital sensors, their previous snobbery completely evaporating into the cold air as they rushed out of the double doors. The door clicked shut, leaving only the young chairman, the old watchmaker, and the autistic boy inside the vast, high-ceilinged room. The young man looked down at the parchment cylinder in his left hand, the wax seal unbroken, containing the future of a global enterprise. Then he looked at the old man's eyes, noticing for the first time the faint, jagged scar running across the left brow, a mark of an ancient industrial accident. My father's journal mentioned a partner who walked away after the great furnace explosion at the original shipyard, he murmured. He wrote that he lost his brother in craftsmanship that day because he chose the money of investors, while his partner chose to preserve the original blueprint. The old man gave a small, weary nod, his thumb gently caressing Bao's hair to keep the boy anchored in the room. "Your father did not choose wrong. Young man, he chose the path that built this city, and he chose the path that protected you. But he knew that a tower built entirely on paper and digital code will always shake when the ground moves. He placed this komai here not as a display of wealth, but as an anchor for his lineage. He knew that one day, his descendants would forget how to listen to the truth of the metal, and they would need someone who still remembers." Bao suddenly reached out his hand, his slender fingers, pointing toward the moving pendulum rod. 0, the boy whispered softly, a look of absolute peace settling over his delicate features. The old man smiled, his chest rising with a deep sense of completion. Zero friction, he translated, looking at the young billionaire. The clock is no longer fighting itself. The gears are singing in perfect alignment, just as they did 3 decades ago. The young chairman felt a profound wave of shame wash over him, remembering the way he had entered the tiny repair shop, throwing cash onto a pile of overdue bills. He looked at his own reflection in the polished glass of the clock, realizing how much of his own humanity he had traded for corporate status and leverage. He walked over to the workbench, picked up the thick stack of cash he had forced the assistant to carry, and held it out to the old man with both hands, his head bowed slightly. "You was blind, sir. I treated you like an obstacle when you were the only one who could save my father's memory. Please, take this, and let me clear your shop's debt immediately. It is the absolute bare minimum I can do." The old man did not reach for the money, his hands remaining steady on his son's shoulders as he looked at the wealthy young executive. "I told you before, young man, my time is not for sale, and my work cannot be bought with a display of leverage. If you want to honor your father's legacy, do not look at this money as a cure for your guilt. Look at the people who depend on your choices, and remember that every cog in your machine matters, no matter how small or dusty it appears to be." The assistant opened the door quietly, his face bright with an urgent excitement as he held a satellite phone. "Mr. Chairman, the board of directors has just convened early in the main auditorium down the hill. The rival investment fund has already submitted a motion to declare the seat vacant. We must arrive with the original document within the next 20 minutes." The young billionaire gripped the parchment cylinder tightly, his eyes flashing with a renewed, grounded determination. He looked at the old man, then down at Bao, who was now tracing the circular path of a small gear on the floor with his finger. "Will you come with me to the boardroom, sir?" The old man shook his head slowly, a gentle but unyielding refusal in his eyes. "The boardroom is a place for numbers and paper. Young man, our work here is finished." But the young chairman stepped closer, his voice filled with a desperate, sincere conviction. "They need to see who actually holds the key to this empire. They need to understand that we are not just a collection of stocks and digital assets. Please, let me show them what a true foundation looks like." The heavy mahogany doors of the grand boardroom flew open with a sharp, echoing crack that stunned the entire room. Inside, 20 corporate directors and legal representatives from the rival investment fund were gathered around a massive glass conference table. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and the cold, predatory tension of a hostile takeover. At the head of the table, a ruthless senior investor was holding a pen, poised to sign the official declaration, stating the chairman's seat was permanently vacant. He stopped his hand in midair, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the entrance. The young billionaire stepped into the room first, his chin held high, holding the ancient parchment cylinder tightly in his left hand. But it was not his presence that caused the board members to whisper in sudden confusion. Right behind the young chairman walked the old watchmaker, his worn canvas pouch hanging heavy over his frayed winter coat. And beside the old man was Bao, the autistic boy, who was looking intently at the spinning silver hands of a small pocket watch he held close to his chest. The senior investor laughed gay, throwing his pen down onto the legal brief with a sharp clatter. "What is the meaning of this ridiculous stunt, Mr. Chairman? We are here to validate the multi-billion-dollar asset distribution of this conglomerate, not to distribute soup to the elderly. If this is your idea of a delaying tactic, your time has officially run out." The legal team from the rival fund stepped forward, their laptops open, ready to present the digital asset seizure order. The young chairman did not look at them. Instead, he walked straight to the center of the room and placed the silver pocket watch with the anchor engraving directly onto the glass table. The metallic thud of the old watch echoed with an unexpected authority, cutting through the murmurs of the elite crowd. Before you sign a single document declaring my father's seat vacant, you will listen to the foundation upon which this building was constructed. 30 years ago, this conglomerate was not built by algorithms, venture capital, or international legal teams. It was built by two men who worked by a furnace until their hands bled, designing the core mechanical governance that still runs every automated harbor in this country. The senior investor leaned back in his leather chair, a cold, arrogant smirk spreading across his face. History lessons do not alter the corporate charter, young man. Your father's shares are invalid without the original master key code, which was locked inside a digital system that your expensive team couldn't even access. The young billionaire smiled, a calm, unyielding expression that he had just learned from the old man standing behind him. The digital system was just a shell, a modern lock designed to keep thieves like you looking in the wrong direction. My father knew that technology could be bought, hacked, or manipulated by capital. So he hid the real master key in a place no computer could find, inside the friction balancing mechanism of a 200-year-old machine. He turned to the old watchmaker, bowing his head with a profound, sincere respect that shocked every director in the room. Sir, please show them what a true foundation looks like. The old man stepped forward, his leather boots making a distinct, scraping sound against the pristine floor, completely ignoring the glares of the corporate lawyers. He did not look at the legal documents or the digital screens. He reached into his canvas pouch and pulled out a simple, hand-carved brass key that had been polished by decades of touch. He placed it right beside the silver watch, its shape perfectly matching the interlocking mechanism hidden within the base of the grand-grandfather clock down the hill. This key does not open a vault of paper money, the old man said, his deep, steady voice instantly silencing the entire boardroom. It releases the primary transmission protocol for the shipping network that your investment fund is trying to steal. My name is on the original patent, filed in 1996, a document that your digital scanners chose to ignore because it was archived in analog ink. The senior investor's face suddenly flushed, turning a pale, sickly white as his lawyers began to look frantically at their screens. The laptop of the lead legal representative began to flash with a series of red security warnings. A collective gasp rippled through the room as the corporate mainframe began to sync with the steady, distant rhythm of the grandfather clock. The master key was not a code of numbers. It was a physical frequency of time, and the old man's hand was the only one that knew how to turn it. The boardroom was instantly plunged into a dead, paralyzed silence as every screen aligned with the central network began to flash with system overrides. The corporate directors, who just moments ago were smiling and exchanging whispers of absolute certainty, stared at their terminal interfaces in utter disbelief. The senior investor dropped his legal pen, his fingers trembling slightly as he leaned closer to the massive glass table to study the ancient brass key. He looked up at the old watchmaker, his face shifting from a volatile crimson to an empty, ghostly white as the reality of the situation crashed down. "How is this possible?" he whispered, his voice cracking as he looked toward his chief legal counsel. "What patent from '96 are you talking about?" The lead lawyer did not look back at him, his eyes completely locked onto a rolling archive document that had just been forced onto his screen. "Sir," the lawyer stammered, his fingers frantically hitting the keyboard, "ruega por." "It is a non-digital master encryption layout registered under an industrial hardware maritime protocol. Because it was classified as a national security, mechanical fail-safe 30 years ago, it bypasses every modern cloud network we own. The young chairman maintained his calm, rock-steady posture, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the glass table as he scanned the room. I told you, gentlemen, my father did not build an empire to be dismantled by a collection of digital spreadsheets and venture capital. He knew that numbers could be erased and managers could be corrupted, but he also knew that the truth of a machine remains absolute. He turned his gaze toward the senior investor, his expression turning sharp with a cold, unyielding determination. You spent 6 months buying up our debt, manipulating our stock, and trying to isolate me before the board could meet. But you forgot to look at the very foundation of the ships that carry your goods across the ocean. You forgot who kept the clocks turning. The old man stepped back, his hand returning gently to Bao's shoulder, keeping the boy centered as the corporate room descended into chaos. Bao looked up from his small silver pocket watch, his eyes shifting across the frantic movements of the board members with a strange, quiet clarity. "Time is up," the boy said softly, his voice cutting through the noise of ringing phones and frantic, whispering like a clear bell. The old watchmaker looked at the senior investor one last time, his faded eyes carrying no hatred, only a profound, heavy dignity. A machine built on greed will always tear its own teeth apart when it runs too fast. "Young man," the old man said calmly, "you wanted to own the time, but you never learned how to respect the hands that gave it to you." The young chairman raised the unbroken parchment cylinder, holding it high for the entire room and the security cameras to record. "The legal inheritance is verified, the network is secure, and this board meeting is officially adjourned." The senior investor sank heavily into his leather chair, his hands completely frozen over the layout of the signed acquisition briefs. The digital security screens covering the perimeter of the boardroom continued to cascade with ancient analog protocol codes, flashing cold amber lines across the polished glass table. Every single director sat in a paralyzed silence, their devices locked by an encryption method that modern cloud computers had no capacity to calculate or trace. The young chairman pulled the heavy red, wax-sealed parchment cylinder close to his chest, his eyes fixing onto the senior investor with a sharp, unyielding edge. "This network was never yours to buy," he said, his voice echoing cleanly through the massive, high-ceilinged room. "You believed you could squeeze this family by manipulating the algorithms on a digital trading floor, but you forgot that water still runs through pipes, and iron still rusts if left untended. My father left this company anchored to a frequency that only a true master of the craft could calculate by ear." The old watchmaker stepped back beside Bao, his calloused thumbs resting securely on the boy's shoulders, keeping the child anchored as the corporate team erupted into a wave of panicked whispers. Bao tilted his head down, ignoring the flashing screens entirely, his attention remaining locked onto the tiny silver gears of the ship's anchor pocket watch that was now resting in the middle of the conference table. "The balance is true," the boy whispered clearly, his voice slicing through the noise of ringing smartphones like a sharp blade. The senior investor looked at the old man's scarred left brow, a cold sweat breaking across his forehead as he realized the legal implications of the ancient patent now displaying on every screen. "If you activate that master override," he stammered, his arrogant composure completely shattered, "you will freeze the shipping logistics of half the eastern seaboard by morning. We have billions of dollars tied to the automated crane routing systems. You will destroy everything we built over the last 12 months. The old watchmaker looked down at the billionaire, his faded eyes showing no malice, only the deep, unmovable dignity of a man who had survived the blast of an engine room furnace. You did not build this system. Young man, you merely put your name on the digital invoice after it was already turning. A machine designed solely to feed greed will always shatter its own teeth when the gears are forced to spin too fast. You wanted to own the time, but you never learned how to respect the hands that built the clock. The young chairman raised the document, holding it directly in front of the primary legal cameras, recording the board meeting. The original inheritance conditions have been physically verified by the co-founder. The override stands. And this acquisition is officially dead.